Okay, I might get us started. First of all, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. To kick us off, I am going to start with an acknowledgement of country. So I am based in Strathfield in Sydney, the home of the Darug people, and I would like to acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging and pay my respects to their continual connection to this land. So I welcome you all from the locations on which you're based, and thank you so much for joining us here and for paying your respect to their culture and traditions. So thank you everybody for joining us. This is our inaugural, our first and foremost early career network capacity building session. This is a new initiative of the Early Career Network, and this is a new initiative that we're trying to do to help support our early career professionals in building their skills, their networks, their capacity, their direction in road safety. So thank you all so much for joining us. The decision for this particular network, this particular session idea came from feedback that we received through our mentorship program. So as a part of the Early Career Network, we do also offer a mentorship program as well as a conference event. And we have received lots of really positive feedback about those initiatives that we do as well. And we have been looking for feedback on other ways that we can support you. And this workshop is one of those ideas. So the focus of our workshop today is on capacity building in terms of collaboration. And we know that especially when you're new to a space, it's hard to sort of build those networks. In particular, one in road safety, where we're very transdisciplinary and we're looking to try and bridge those gaps between industry, academics, community, and government. And so we are getting two speakers today who come from different backgrounds and different perspectives, who are going to share their stories with us about how they've found building collaborative relationships across those disciplines, and how they've the lessons that they've learnt from it. We do really want this to be interactive for you. So we are going to have each of our speakers speak for about 15 minutes, and then we're going to have a big Q&A session. So please think of questions that you want to ask them, even if it's not just something that might be related to one of the speakers per se, but a general kind of question that you've got about how you go about building collaborations, and it can be a bit more of a discussion between us. So please make note of those questions, drop them in the chat. You do all have access to the chat to be able to do that. We'll be able to then have a bit of a Q&A session as part of this. But before we kind of get into that Q&A, I do have two very wonderful speakers who are joining us today, who are being very generous with sharing their expertise and their experiences. So we've got Billy Green and we've also got Rachel. And so we're very glad to have both of them here. Billy's going to kick us off. And I'm not going to sort of do a full spiel of your bio, Billy, but I will just give you a little bit of a sense of his background. So Billy was originally a primary school teacher and has an extensive background in education, and he's bringing that wealth of educational experience that he has to the road safety space and looking at how we can kind of build and translate learning and community road safety programs to enable uptake in the community, and using kind of educational principles as the background from that. He told me that he runs podcasts and does videos and does a whole bunch of media things in this space. And so I think that we can learn a lot from you. So I'm going to hand it over to you now, Billy, and thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. And it's a real privilege to be here. And yeah, particularly seeing it's the very first one. So I'm sure Rachel feels the same. It's quite a privilege to be here. So welcome to everybody. Now, just to keep me on track, I'm going to share my screen. Don't panic. It's not a 50 PowerPoint slide presentation. I've just got a handful of things just to keep me on track. And I'll get through them as quickly as I can, because I think the heart of this will be around the discussion that we have towards the end. But I'd like to give you some my context. So yes, it was... My work has been in education, largely primary school teacher, principal and whatever. And I've been working in the road safety space for about 10 or 11 years now. And I'll jump on that. It'll be sort of summarised in these PowerPoints. So let's hope that this all works. As I warned before, you are dealing with a boomer. So let's just hope it's working. And I'm assuming that's working, is it? Thank you. Oh, perfect. All right. So my work has largely been with the Department of Transport and Planning in Victoria. So government department, state government department, which was originally known as Vic Roads. That's sort of undergone a change over a period of time. But those sorts of changes aren't necessary for me to worry about, and certainly not for you. But so that's largely who I've worked for the last, or worked alongside for the last 10 years. So the projects that I've worked on, and there've been a number of them, but the ones that are probably most relevant for you today, the one that we're working on currently is a government initiative called My Learner's Free Lesson. The aim of that program is to train driving instructors who then take young learner drivers out. So the learner drivers apply to go onto that program after between 10 and 30 hours of driving experience with their supervised driver. And the idea is to get the driving instructor to run a lesson with the supervising driver and the young learner and highlight the dangers, if you like, of that young learners, well, not so much the young learners come up against, but early novice drivers come up against, and try to convince them and their parents to take on a more comprehensive learner driving program. So that involves a staged approach. It's a session that runs for about an hour. 15 minutes of that is a chat, and then the other 45's a drive, and we break those up. It's a little bit like what was the Keys to Drive federal program. That's a state-based one. So that's one of the programs I've been working on. I can talk more towards that if later on, but we'll just leave that for the moment. The other one I worked on prior to that was not dissimilar. It was called Road Smart. And instead of targeting both the supervising driver and the learner driver, this program largely targeted the learner driver. So we worked in schools and largely worked with students that were year 10. So they're around 15, 16, just on the cusp of picking up their learner permit. And the idea again was to convince them that as learner drivers, but particularly as young novice drivers, they were most at risk on the roads, and that we wanted to, again, improve their learner driving experience with the hope that that experience would influence how well that they could see and perceive the road environment and keep themselves safe. And the very first program I worked on, so working backwards, was a program that we have in Victoria called L2P. And that program commenced about 2007, 2008, and was in response to the Victorian government introducing a graduated licensing system. So that required learner drivers to have 120 hours of driving experience as a learner. They knew that that program would disadvantage up to perhaps 10% of learner drivers because they wouldn't have capacity to have a supervising driver that could take them out for various reasons. That might have been from a single parent family and mum didn't have the time. They may have not had a car at all. So we train mentors to take those learner drivers out. It's been an enormously successful program. As I said, it started around 2007, 2008. It's still running. And they've trained and had over 1,000 young people pick up their license through that program. So as you can see, most of the programs that I've been involved have been based in the community and definitely targeted at young learner drivers. And that's sort of suited my background and my interest as well. So my role over that period of time has been to work with Department of Transport and Planning staff to design and evaluate in-class lessons. So in other words, the actual lessons that we deliver to those particular students. But it's also been to design and evaluate and deliver to facilitators. So in other words, the people who then go out and teach in those schools. And also because I like to keep my hand in and just to make sure that things are working well, I actually go out and deliver them myself. So I'll often go out, or used to go out and teach some of the year 10 kids, as well as select some of the staff and then train those staff to deliver the programs. And in that way, I've got a fairly good overview of how both those things are going. What do I bring to these projects? Well, it's not a research background. Rachel will talk about our research background. She has much more experience in that area. Mine has been a strong, as it says there, a strong experience-based and practical understanding of improving student outcomes and working with schools. Now, that's really important. It's more important than it might sound, and I'll talk about that in a moment. In the most basic of terms, what I was on about in these programs is what works and what doesn't. Because when you're working with schools, and I'll talk about this more and you might want to ask me about this. When you're working with schools, or particularly, even I suppose any organisation, they have got their own cultures, they've got their own ways of operating, and it's really important that you have an understanding of how they operate, because that will really influence what's possible for you to bring to those circumstances. So my background, as I said, working as a teacher and as a principal, and still working, working on education podcasts and webinars, I've still got a very solid understanding of how schools operate. And being able to bring that to the Department of Transport and Planning is really important, because they do often have gaps in their learning in terms of that. So that's what I've brought to those projects. Some of the challenges that I've encountered over that period, and these are certainly not at all any criticisms, so they're just observations, just to give you an idea that you will come across challenges that you may not have foreseen, is that it was the department that I've worked for, they do struggle sometimes to understand the learning environment, and in particular the school environment. Road safety to all of us on here today is a major priority for all of us, and we can see the sense in it without being needing to be convinced too much. If you go into schools, they've of course got their own priorities. And how are you going to get these programs into schools? And I'm sure if you've already worked in the community, how are you going to work with communities to get them to understand that these things are a priority? So that was one of the challenges that I sort of came up against initially, trying to get the Department of Transport and Planning to understand when you go into schools, you need to do things in a certain way. Otherwise, schools are they're already busy, they're dynamic places, and they can very easily shut you out. I think the other thing is what I was able to bring to them, and one of the challenges was to get them to understand what students are like. A lot of people's understanding of schools based on their past experience with school, or what they might see on a TV show, and schools are nothing really like that at all. So it's trying to get them to understand the complexities, the needs of students, the motivations, and the environment they're going into. And just to give you one example, so when we were working in on the Road Smart program, one of the first things that we would do when we would go out and speak to the students would say, right, it's great to be here. This program is going to talk to you about your learner driver experience. Just let me know how many of you in the class at the moment have got your learners, and who's thinking of getting their learners in the next 6 months. Now, if I went into an inner city school in Melbourne, I might have got 1 or 2 hands up, and not many more that joined in and said, yep, I'm interested in getting them in the next 6 months. If I went into a rural setting, almost every kid put their hand up. So they're very different environments. So one of the challenges again that I was not so much faced with, but I had to speak about when I worked with the department, was that not all schools are the same. Not all kids are the same, not all communities are the same. So that was really interesting as well. I think you'll always come up against there's always a bit of a schism between policy and practicality. So how can you take what might even be research or policy, and how can you change that so it can be practically implemented? And the other thing that I encountered, which was always fascinating and interesting, and I might just flesh this out a little bit, was the gulf. Oh, well, not the gulf, but a lot of people have the idea that the more that we tell people, the more that they'll know, and the more that they'll be able to change. So that if you fill PowerPoint slides up with lots of information, and you have lots and lots of them, when they walk out of the room, the kids will know lots and lots, and they'll be able to do things differently. That doesn't happen. Okay, that's very much so. Trying to get people to understand that from the start was really challenging as well. So around road user behaviour, yeah, it's definitely important that they, have knowledge and they have skills, but there's all sorts of things, as I'm sure you were aware, that influence road user behaviour. So when I was working with the department, it was trying to convince them it's not just about the kids having the skill to do something, it's not just about the kids having the knowledge about something, it's all those other things that influence their behaviour, their peer pressure, the consequences, what they value. So that was an interesting thing that I had to come up against as well. And probably one of the ways that I try to explain it to them was this. So if, for example, I had decided that I was going to go for a trip to Rome, all I might need is to go and have a listen to someone, or look at something on YouTube, or look at a PowerPoint, and just pick up about all the sites and all the things that I could do in Rome. That's one particular, and as much knowledge as I could get, that would be great. However, if I wasn't going to go to Rome and you were trying to convince me that I should, that's a completely different set of slides, and that's a completely different way to operate. So when you're trying to change behavior, which is what we're trying to do in road safety a lot of the time, we have to get away from that idea of just knowledge. So they were really interesting things that I had to come to get my head around, and interesting things that I had to try to impress upon the people that I was working with at the department. So what have I learned from all those 10 years that I've worked with them? And then this is the sort of thing I'm more than happy to, discuss with you as we move on. I'm not really one for giving advice, so it's more to the point, what have I learned? First of all, if you're working with, mine's working with government, but I guess it's the same with industry, but let's stay with government for me. Use your expertise and back it in. Have a real clarity about who you are and what you bring to it, and know fully that you are there for a reason. They've employed you. They've decided that they want to have you on board for a reason. So be very clear about what that reason is, and have confidence in the fact that they wouldn't have popped you in that role. They wouldn't have come to ask for your input if they didn't need you. So be very clear about who you are and what you can offer. I think whenever you're working with a large organisation, as I said, as I was with a government bureaucracy, it's really interesting to listen and learn. They'll have their own ways of doing things, and they'll have their own cultures and processes, and they'll also have great expertise. And I've learnt enormous amount about road safety just by being in the spaces and listening to the people that I've been with. I had something to contribute for sure, but they had a lot of knowledge that I didn't know about at all. So it's really interesting. I think it's really, other thing is to work from the point that you're going to work with and collaborate with people, and try to build relationships. I think that's really important. Relationships are still the core of how we I guess, progress when we're trying to, change behaviour. And so be really upfront about that. Try to, just try to, have a good relationship with the people that you work for. Be prepared to lead. Be prepared to be challenged and to challenge them. I think, that's part of the role that you've got if you're working in collaboration with these organisations, and you tend to work for them temporarily. Don't be frightened of, putting your point of view in that way that's going to be seen as a really positive and constructive way to do it. Another really one that's really important is to be aware of timelines. So don't make sure that you fully understand what their timelines are, what their expectations are of you, and don't commit to things that you simply can't do, because your efficacy is really important. You are sort of you tend to work on your own, or I have, as a collaborator, as a consultant, but a lot of people are relying on the work that you've got. So it's really important that you are able to meet their timelines, and that what you do is exactly what they want. So be really clear about that. I never had any real problems with that, because just the way that I am, the fact that I've got a PowerPoint here today sort of proves it. That's the sort of way that I operate. I like to work. I like to get things done quickly. But you do have to realize that a lot of people are relying on you. And if you don't meet your timelines, or what you produce is not what they want, it's difficult for them at their work. Be patient, particularly if you're working with a big organisation like I have been. A department is a bit like, turning around the Queen Mary. It doesn't do things very quickly. And often you are used to working independently and getting things done in your own way. They'll often have a lot of checks and balances in there. They'll often have to send things away to be approved and even designed and branded, and that takes an enormous amount of time. So it can get frustrating, but you've just got to understand that that's how it operates. And I think the final point that I've learned is to enjoy it. It's a remarkable opportunity. I think I've loved my time as a teacher. I still love the time I spend working on the webinars and the podcasts and things that I do, the colleagues, the working with kids. But the one thing that road safety offers that is, I don't want to overplay it, but it's really important, is you are working in the space where you have the capacity to really change, not just change, but save people's lives. And I don't want to overstate that, but I think you should always keep it forefront. It's a really important space that you're working in. And that's a great motivator, and it's a remarkable opportunity, and something that I've really enjoyed. So that's my little take, and so I'll look forward to having a chat with you down the track, and I'll hand over to Rachel, I guess.
I'll do a quick step in there. Thank you so much for sharing all of that, Billy. That was incredibly helpful. And I think that guiding message, I've got it over the back of my shoulder here. This is the guiding message. This is what we're trying to achieve, is to reduce road trauma, and having that front of mind in the work that you do is really helpful. And if you're all working to that same goal, the partners and yourself, that goal, that underlying goal, is really helpful to kind of keep you all moving in the same direction. So not losing sight of that's a really important message. I will open up, as a reminder to everybody, opportunities for questions to Billy at the end, but we will move now on to Rachel. So I am very pleased to be able to introduce Dr. Rachael Wynne. She is a lecturer at the University of Newcastle, and she's joining us just coming back from a trip, so with a bit of jet lag. So we're incredibly grateful that you've been able to join us, Rachel. Rachel has a background in human factors and also in my personal area of psychology and the intersection between human factors and cognitive psychology. So she's got a lot of experience in both road safety as well as in aviation, and she's going to talk to us about a collaborative project from the perspective of a researcher engaging with other partners. So thank you so much, Rachel. Rachel, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jo. Yeah, thank you everyone for giving me the opportunity to come and chat to you today. I am going to talk about one particular project that the University of Newcastle has with the Australian Automobile Association, the AAA, but this is an industry partner that I have worked with both at the university and at my previous institution. So I can talk about it in sort of almost two frames of reference in that way. So fun fact for Billy, I also did research with learner drivers. So I was sitting there listening to your talk thinking, oh, this is all very interesting. We'll have to have a chat afterwards. But the project that we are working on with the AAA at the moment is it is around driver distraction. And it is about how distracting your in-vehicle infotainment system is. As I was saying with Billy and Jo before we started this, I'm unable to have slides for this presentation because I am very slack in my time management, left this to the last minute, and would have needed to have them signed off by the AAA before I could present them to you. So that's kind of one of the little caveats that we have around working with an industry partner, that traditionally in an academia role, you have a lot of freedom. In all of my other research projects that I'm doing, I can do the slides on the plane on the way to the conference and not have that be as problematic as what I need to consider with this particular project that we're working with for the AAA. So as I said, it is about the distractibility of your in-vehicle infotainment system. So how distractible is doing different tasks like making a phone call, navigating, receiving a text message, sending a text message, changing the radio station in different designs of different vehicles, and can we develop some sort of safety ratings around distractibility in that way? So that's kind of the crux of what we're hoping to achieve with this particular project. Can we improve road safety in that way? In terms of how the collaboration started in the first place, so if anyone else has experience working with the AAA, they do certain call outs for different research areas of focus. So they've done that in the past. They kind of like send out an email or post on their social media platforms that they are looking for expressions of interest in these fields. And they did some workshops back in, I believe it was early 2021. They first did this call out. They brought in experts in the field from different universities mostly, saying these are the questions that we want to answer. Pitch us your ways that we can solve this problem. So the team at the University of Newcastle put together, came back from that sitting and put together a bit of a pitch about how we could solve. I say we, I wasn't in the room at this particular point in time, but how we could solve this problem around distractibility. We put together a pitch and we went through a two-stage process. So the first stage was a 6-month pilot where we essentially had to demonstrate that our larger project was feasible and would produce some outcomes as like a check that we were able to actually deliver on what we were promising before they invested the money on the larger, which is now a 3-year project that we're doing. So the initial collaboration with the industry partner came out because of, I suppose, networking and reputation of the broader team, as well as an awareness of the sorts of things that the AAA are likely to do. So having now worked with them for for nearly 4 years now, we are on their radar of when they are looking out to do more appeals, the next stage of research funding, those sorts of things. And so we're kind of in their mindset of when they're looking for people to work with. So they have these general lists that they reach out to and general platforms that they advertise through for those sorts of appeals. In terms of how it differs to other conventional approaches, as I mentioned initially, like there's a lot of oversight, which in my other research positions, I don't have to be concerned about. I don't have to worry about checking off what it is that I'm saying in terms of slide decks and things like that for any of my other research projects. But the AAA do have a lot of oversight over what we do and what we say about this particular project. They also have full ownership of the data and the resources and everything in relation to this project. Through working with them for a little while, we've developed a very good relationship where they do trust us to do extra things like this that we would like to do in terms of discussing the project, but that certainly took time for us to build that relationship and build that rapport. So it is a little bit different than other government grants that I've been a part of in the past or ARC projects that I've worked on. Even I worked on a project with the RACQ, which even though they're aligned with the AAA, they didn't have the same controls and oversights that the AAA go for. So that's just one aspect of this particular industry collaborator, that they like to be involved in this process and aware of the message that we're putting out with their name attached to it. In terms of other industry projects, I don't think it differs too much in terms of how much you need to meet with them, what information they want regularly, and that sort of thing. But I guess it is just that difference in flexibility from traditional academia research, where if you're in an academic position or an academic role, you have that freedom and flexibility that you might not otherwise have. In terms of the opportunity that this has granted me as an early career researcher, it has been one of my most fruitful engagements. I regularly catch up with the ladies that work in the research team at the AAA, to the point where, you know, when I've been in the towns where they are based, I will see them as well. So there's a great sense of increasing my network that I'm able to work with. They've introduced me to some other people at some other group meetings, and it's just kind of expanded my research area and my research collaborations. So I guess when the next call out comes out, I would encourage you to engage with the AAA, because they do offer a great network opportunity for you. And also they are very interested in our end goal of road safety and road safety awareness. So it's a very closely aligned research engagement, with the acknowledgement that it does come with a certain amount of oversight and approval and reduction in some of the flexibility that I perhaps would have with another funding body. And being that they are an independent funder, or they do have stakeholders, you do need to make sure that your research is meeting their requirement and their end goal for their stakeholders. So it's another person that and I don't even directly speak to this particular group, but it's another group that you need to be considerate of in terms of the research outputs and end goals. It's making sure that the clubs and membership groups that are feeding into the AAA are able to get something out of your research. So that sounds really crass, but that they are getting something for their input in your research. It's not just me being off and doing what it is that I want. They are a research group, the people that we work with at the AAA, but they are also a very high level thinking. So it's easy for us to spend ages and all of our team meetings catching up and going into the nitty gritty about what this data means and how great this data is that we're playing around with, and get all of our really exciting nerd on. But then we go and meet with them and we have to remember that, no, this is a broader spectrum project and we have to take a step back and make sure that we're translating this in a meaningful way. And so that has helped me in terms of my research translation as well, that being regularly forced to communicate to a general audience what it is that I'm doing on this particular project. My advice would be, if you are interested in pursuing a relationship or a connection with the AAA, to definitely go for it, but also to just be upfront about what you're able to deliver and not to promise something that you aren't able to deliver, because they have pitched this to a board who are expecting you to achieve that milestone. And in saying that, just being also open to how they can help you, because they have an access to clubs and networks and societies. So if it's in terms of getting access to regular road users and people who are out in different areas of Australia, it has been really helpful in terms of expanding our ability to access end users in regions of the community that we might not otherwise be able to here at the University of Newcastle. But I think that is about all I have to say. I'll hand it back over to you, Jo, and welcome questions from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Rachel. I also have a project that I do with the AAA. So as you were talking, so much of what you were saying resonates with me. So I can echo a lot of what Rachel has shared about her experiences, both the balances that you need to have, but the ability to broaden your network that really comes from that. So I know that there is a question in the chat, so we will start with that one. Anne, did you want to say what you've put in the chat? I can see that you're on the screen.
Yes, I just want to know the AAA expression of interest Rachel mentioned. So is this apply only to researchers at the university or any researchers from government agency or something like that?
I believe it requires a partner university institution, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I know we were paired with an engineering firm because they had also expressed a similar interest and were able to come on board to the project with us, because they would have been unable to pursue that research solely on their own. Part of it comes down to I believe, I'll have to double check this and maybe I can grab your email address and get back to you with a clearer answer at the end. But part of it comes down to, I guess, the approvals in terms of ethical oversight. So they're unable to administer any of that sort of ethical oversight. So they look to universities for some of that as well. Yeah. Or even Jo might be able to offer some advice from her end of working with the AAA.
I was going to say essentially the same thing, Rachel, in the sense that non-university partners are not excluded from engagement, but it's typically through partnerships. And one of the things that they are strongly encouraging, and what they do actually do a very good job of, is going, hey, you've got an idea over here. It's similar to these people over here and these people over here. Maybe you can come together as a team and sort of bringing together people who have similar ideas. And that's one of the real perks of the EOI process. You can put together 3 or 4 pages, pitch the idea without all the detail that we have to normally do for grant proposals. And then they try and bring together people who are coming up with similar ideas in order to maximize impact and reduce duplication. And that's often when you might have those partnerships between a university and an industry organization. So that's largely what they try and do.
Yep, thank you.
And in terms then of also like expanding your network. So we've had opportunities with to engage with those industry partners that we otherwise wouldn't have had the opportunity to meet because the AAA have put us in touch. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you for that, Rachel, and thank you for that question, Anne. Billy, there is a question for you in the chat from Angus.
Yes, thanks, Angus. If those that I haven't got chat on, I'll just read it to you. Can you speak to the challenges of motivating government to actually fund road safety initiatives? Outside of grants, there seems to be an attitude of risk aversion and reluctance to provide real dollars for original research in this space. Look, that's always going to be a problem with governments. Look, one of the things that I've learned working with the Department of Transport, and I'll speak frankly because one of the luxuries of being at my age and where I am in my career, I don't the filters are down, and I can just say what I fancy. You do, when you're working with government, you do start to realise that most of it is filtered through what the minister wants to say and what they want to project. That's being pretty blunt, but that's the case. What I've found in Victoria is there hasn't been so much a reluctance to fund useful road safety programs, but they are sometimes they go through that filter of a bit like what Rachel mentioned, is that you've got stakeholders there and they want to get some bang for their buck. Well, so do government ministers and so do government. So that they're going to invest in anything in road safety, they need to have it at some point where they're going to get some kudos for what they're doing. So it may not be, for example, what I, as an educator and someone with now, I suppose, 10 years experience working in road safety, it may not be the project that I think is the most valuable. And it may not be the project that I think we're going to get the most reward from, but that's what you have to work with. And look, that's understandable. We live in a democracy. That's how they work. And my attitude over the 10 years, and it goes to one of the words I spoke about in terms of patience, building relationships, is that you work within the system that you're in to try to get the best outcome that you can. And I think that, yes, I'll give you one example. One of the problems that I've encountered in working with government is, and if Joe or Rachel or anyone's got any comments on this, I'm happy to hear from you, but they tend to work in silos. They tend not to talk a lot to each other. And so, for example, as an educator, what I would love to see in terms of road safety would be a cradle to the grave approach. So we start with working with young families at the very earliest point, and work right through to people who are in Rotary and older drivers, even pedestrians. We do the whole scope, if you like. That is an educator's sort of perspective. I totally get it. But what they tend to do is just operate in silos. Now, all of the things that they are doing, I think, are really useful and worthwhile. I've not worked on a project that isn't, but they don't tend to connect a lot. And I think that's, so it's not so much a lack of funding, it's probably a lack of big vision, because it's very hard to sell a vision like that. People want quick fixes to problems. Like, I'm sure you'd all be well aware of this more than I am, that, one of the biggest problems that people have in roads, everything's blamed on the quality of the roads. Nothing's blamed on the quality of the driving. And so as governments, it's very difficult for them to challenge the drivers. And, even when there's a proposal in Victoria at the moment in one of the local council areas to drop the speed limit to 30. But if you listen to talkback radio around that, it's just another nanny state, or it's another revenue raising. It's really hard to sell what we know about the research around driver safety and pedestrian safety. Yeah, so yes, they are all the challenges, Angus. But I guess the other thing that I often, the mantra that I use, and I've had to, again, it gets back to the word patience that I put in there, is just be very wary of not letting perfect be the enemy of good. We've got an opportunity to change road user behaviour to make everybody as safe as we can, to reduce road trauma. You might want to do it in a certain way, but sometimes we've just got to take baby steps. And look, I've always said to everyone I've ever been involved with, if we save one life, well, that's better than not doing it. So yeah, it's complicated, but yeah, it's a bit like Rachel said, they'll want to get bang for their buck, and that's where they'll invest, even though it may not be quite where you think it's going to get them. You could perhaps do other things that might be what we think would be better. I hope that answers the question. Oh, there you are there. Thanks.
Thanks.
Doesn't sound too cynical.
No, part of what you raised then actually brought up a question that I had for you as you was talking earlier, which is around that community engagement piece, which is, how do you get the community to come along the journey with you? Because it's not just collaboration between us and industry and government. this only works if the community comes along the journey. How have you found in your experience you've been able to get that to happen with your
Wow, that is a really tricky one. But look, to be honest, it's really to me about, and I'll tell you a little story because that's what primary school teachers do. It's really about if you can genuinely explain and get the information out there and people can see the common sense of it, they will come on board. So I'll give you a story. So we used to go out and deliver these programs to year 10 kids. And the teacher would always sit up the back of the room because they had to, they had to supervise the classes. And when we spoke about the importance of having a 4 or 5 star rated car when you get your first car, rather than just getting, granny's old 1 or 2 15-year-old outdated car that was potentially dangerous on the road. So when we explained that to the kids, and we had a little video to explain why higher rated cars were safer and that cars should be, no older than 10 years, the kids would think, oh, that's, But what was fascinating was that at that point, the teacher would butt in. And they would often say to us, oh, wow, is that true? Gee, I was just about to get my daughter. I think I'll kick in a few extra thousand and change the car I'm going to buy my daughter. So over the 10 years that I've worked, it really is just being persistent with the message and trying to bring people on board by not being too preachy or not being too didactic even, but just letting them see the sense of it. And, and that's often difficult. But, I used to say so I'm training mentors in this LTP program, they tend to be retired men, not always, but tend to be retired men, 60 on, and they'll have particular attitudes about the road and whatever. And I'd often say to them, well, yeah, you can complain about the road all you like, but if you've got an 18-year-old driving on that road at night and it's raining, that road's not going to be fixed. The only way that we can get that kid safe on the road is to, one, not put him there in the first place, or to drive appropriately at the speed and the conditions, or, drive at a speed that conditions allow. And they could see the sense in that, even though they still wanted to hold on to, oh, they should fix the road. But, so yeah, I think just persisting with, the truth that we've got, what the evidence says, but doing it in a way that tries to bring people along. Does that sound right?
No, that sounds right, and that's really, really helpful. And that kind of links to the question that Matin's put in the chat, which is around, despite all of the evidence and sticking to that evidence, the media often manages to put that negative spin on a positive change. How can we collaborate with media rather than fight against them?
Oh, that is really tricky. This is another funny story. I don't know if you're aware of a guy in Melbourne, because Neil Mitchell, he was probably like the Alan Jones of Sydney, I guess. So that's what we're talking about. And he interviewed me at the start of the road safety program. And he asked me some curly questions. And I'll give, anyway, when the interview wrapped up and I was off, his response to the audience was, oh, I don't think he knows what he's talking about. So yeah, it is really tricky to engage with the media. But again, I think it's about being open, honest, and relying on what we know is true, but trying to make that truth in research as practical as we possibly can. So he asked me a question of, what would you teach a 16-year-old kid who's driving at night, and if they got their wheels caught in a gravel road, what's the first thing you'd be telling them? And my answer was, well, the first thing I'd be telling them is they shouldn't be on that road in the first place, and it would be well better at their level of experience to avoid those situations. Now that, as I said, led into him having a snide remark after I'd finished up. But the truth was, that is the right answer. You really are trying to get young learner, novice drivers to recognise road conditions and thinking, that is not a road I need to be driving on. I shouldn't be driving on that road. That's the truth of it. And I think, I still think my answer was honest, and I think it still was the right answer. But yeah, and I still would persist with that. But it is difficult. The media love a hit, and they love a cheap shot. And unfortunately, it's got worse, I think, not better. But I think that's no reason for us to give up. Is that okay?
All of the answers are okay, Billy.
As I said, I'm very practical based.
I'll just open it up. Does anybody else have any other questions for either Billy or Rachel? If you do, just unmute yourself and Off you go.
Got a question for you, Billy. Actually, it probably applies to both of you in terms of once you've done the research and it's been accepted by your research partner as credible, worthwhile, worth implementing. How do you find about implementing that on a statewide level or a national level as opposed to just a local community project?
Rachel, you might be better to ask that one, answer that one, and I might talk about it in terms of changing, well, you know, research and practicalities. But if you want to talk to that, Rachel.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So I think using the AAA as an example is quite helpful because that can be a little bit easier because they have such a national credibility that it'll open some of those doors to government change. I guess try not to be too cynical, but an election cycle can be really quite helpful in some of those sorts of things. In terms of having the research be presented to a minister in an elections time, that can be quite helpful. I know that they have the AAA have a real desire to have a lot of this information that we are collecting at the moment have national and international appeal. So we are engaging with ANCAP, Euro ANCAP, as well as the American ANCAP to kind of have some translation because particularly in terms of distractibility of vehicles, the Australian market is probably not going to have too much of an impact. We need to get that broader translation. And so they are helping us to engage with international collaborators to have some of that impact. Does that help answer your question? Sorry.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. I guess then it's, making your research so that it can be internationally applicable.
At least for the project that we're working on with the distraction, for some smaller market stuff that I've done with RACQ, that needed to only have, I guess, Brisbane City Council engagement. And so we worked with the Brisbane City Council because they were able to engage us in that sort of pathway. And them opening the door for us helped with that.
The generalizability of your research comes into play.
Yeah.
Right on. And Billy, in regard to curriculum, so I'm in the learner driver space as well and the training of them. How do you find about getting learner programs into something like a national curriculum or state curriculum as opposed to just at a school or district level?
Oh, wow, that is so tricky. And we are currently the last meeting I attended with the Department of Transport was on that topic particularly. So, and this goes to what I spoke of earlier about government and silos. So what we've been able to do, so I collaborate with two ladies that I work with who were both ex-teachers, a bit like me, and that's been really helpful. They've got really good Department of Education contacts as well. So what we've been able to do is, just the name escapes me now. So we've got a program here in Victoria. I think it might even be about respectful relationships and about and through the health and phys ed curriculum, there is a natural space for road safety because it's about personal safety. So we were able to make the case to the Victorian Department of Education that there is a natural place for road safety for it to sit around personal safety and almost around respectful relationships, so keeping yourself safe. So that was around, issues around, consent and bullying and all those sorts of things. So we said, yes, it still has a space in there. So trying to then, and then this is why practicalities come into it. So a little bit like what's happening now right across Australia, but certainly in New South Wales, I know, and certainly in Victoria, they have now moved to what they used to use a constructive approach in schools, so sort of a more inquiry-based approach. Now we've got a much more explicit teaching approach. So not only do we have to move and convince them that road safety has got a role in keeping your personal safety, so under the health and phys ed banner, if you like. But we then have to convince them that we can devise units of work, curriculum statements, and actual lessons that are written in an explicit format. So that's where we're at the moment, just moving towards that. And I'll just tell you a funny story. We've had quite a prolonged dry autumn down here. We had a lovely sunny weekend, a few weekends, way too drought prone, unfortunately, down this way. I know you've had rain in other areas, but we've had it dry. It was a very sunny late autumn weekend. I'm sitting at my table for the entire weekend. I'm 65 years old and I'm writing 16 lesson plans for 6-year-olds in an explicit format. And that was my weekend. And I'm really thinking, should I really be still doing this? But to answer your question, Karen, you've got to convince them. And if we didn't come up with that, if we didn't show that, if we didn't find the place for it, then they just shut you down and you don't go anywhere. So it's a lot of networking, politicking, if you like, and trying to convince them that you've got a space for them, whether that's in an individual school or even into the broader curriculum. So yeah, it's always a battle. It's very much a battle. But again, you've just got to go in optimistically, hopefully, patiently, and keep pecking away. And we're at a better space now than we've been for the 10 years that I've been there, but it's taken a long time. So yeah, I hope that doesn't dismay you.
No, that's good to hear. And I can see how both of your responses.
The only other advice, is Karen dropped out or is
Yep, yeah, she's just dropped out.
Is helpful, but certainly then developing it to the specifics of the partner you want to hopefully use to implement the program.
Yeah, I know. I think Rachel's point again before, I think it's really salient, and that's that notion of you've got stakeholders there who have their own views and cultures and processes and beliefs and whatever, and they want to see what they want to see. And if you push back against that, you'll get nowhere. You have to meet somewhere in the middle. And then what I'd like to think is I'll meet them in the middle, then I'll drag them over to my side.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
You have to give you have to give a bit. Yeah.
All right. Thank you both so much. I've just got one final question for you, which is you've talked about kind of established relationships that you've got. We need to start them in the first place. So what are your tips for starting a relationship with somebody and kind of how you've kind of gone about that? And I'll take sort of like a key tip or 2 tips from each of you to sort of for our early career professionals who are on the call to take away to go, how do I get started?
Do you want to go first, Rachel?
Sure. Thank you. I guess I will acknowledge that I was invited in both cases that I worked with the AAA initially, I was employed to work on a project. So I was, that's incorrect. I was employed at the University of Newcastle, knowing that this project was happening. But then the first project at my previous institution, I was employed to work on a grant that they had obtained. So I will acknowledge a little bit of privilege in that sort of sense that I didn't have to do the initial interacting. There were people who were in established positions who did that for me a bit. However, I think it's also really important that I had met some of these people at the road safety conference that I went to a few years before. So that sort of networking opportunity meant that when I joined the first call, Michelle and Kate from the AAA recognized me as a person. So that first initial ice-breaking activity didn't necessarily need to happen. So I will give a big shout out to the Road Safety Conference as a way of that sort of platform happening. And also making use of, and I'm really bad at this, networking opportunities. So similar things like this ECR network where you're getting to know people from a broad range will help, because that means that someone might think of you when that opportunity opens, that you might not be able to do that skill set, but I know Joe and Joe might be able to do that sort of thing. So that sort of level of introduction can really help.
I would 100% agree. And like Rachel, I was a bit of a nepo baby. I was tapped on the shoulder to come and do my very first job. But what it meant, and I couldn't stress this more, that's why I popped it in, that sort of advice thing. Be aware of your timelines, who you are, what you offer, and your efficacy. If you build a good reputation, you'll get asked back. And the reason that is because these people are busy. They've got their, it's always, when you go to market, you never know quite what you're going to get. But if, for example, even today I've worked with Joe and Rachel and whatever. And so if I've worked with Rachel a few times, I think, this is how they organise it, I think, let's get Rachel back in because we know what we're going to get. And she might be able to lead us to someone else that's going to, if she doesn't do it, she can tell us someone else. So it's really important that you build those networks, because then you'll get asked back, or you'll be able to, think of someone else that might be able to help. But the other story I want to tell you is about a young, and this is the other thing I would say, apply for every single possibility that comes up. The lady I ended up working with, she's no longer there now, but she applied for a job to teach in the schools in this Year 10 program. So I was on the panel to select her. I didn't know her from at all, but I selected her and she was great. We'd gone well. Over a period of time, we worked together. They were then looking for someone to fill a larger role at the Department of Transport. And they said, oh, is there anyone you can think of? I said, yeah, you've got one there. We've got, and she came on board and she ended up, it was funny, I'd select her and she ended up my boss. So that's the way that it works. I couldn't, look, the people that work in this space are great, largely. So apply for everything that you get, build your network, build your reputation by doing the job as well as you can. And it's a small enough field that if you do well, you'll keep getting asked back to do those jobs, even if that means that you spend a weekend writing lesson plans for 6-year-olds.
Well, hopefully you don't have too many more of those weekends ahead of you. But thank you so much to both you and to Rachel for sharing your experiences, passing on what you have learnt, not your advice, but what you have learnt in the journey that you've had. It's been incredibly helpful, I think, for everybody on the call, and we really appreciate that. If to anybody, if there are any other additional questions that you think of, feel free to send them through to the ECN email address, and I'm happy to sort of pass those on to Rachel and to Billy, especially if this is an opportunity for network building, if there's things that Rachel said or that Billy said that you could see as a potential avenue for connection and building collaborations. Use us. We're here, and we're here to sort of help it and support that relationship building that starts often through incidental meetings that end up building into those things. That person you hire that ends up being the boss. So thank you everybody so much for joining us. I really appreciate you coming to our very first one of these. If you've got feedback, please let us know, and looking forward to seeing you in the future. Thanks so much again, Billy and Rachel, and have a lovely
pleasure.
day.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having me. Lovely to meet you all.
All the best.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.